All right. Good evening, all. Welcome to Bookhampton, RJ Julia Booksellers, and Wesleyan RJ Julia Bookstore's virtual event featuring founder and CEO of Acumen, Jacqueline Novogratz, and curator of the TED Conference, Chris Anderson. We are thrilled for tonight's discussion. Before we get started, just a few quick Zoom housekeeping details to go over. Please ask questions using the chat box function of your Zoom screen. We're going to get to as many of your questions as we can later in the evening. And though you will remain muted throughout the duration of the event, we do have a Bookhampton staff member monitoring the chat box. So send them on over. For optimal viewing, you can select Speaker View in the top right corner of your screen, and that will allow the speaking author to remain highlighted throughout the duration of the event. If at any point you should get disconnected, simply re-click the event link that was sent to you earlier today and you'll be readmitted. And of course, don't forget to purchase your copy of Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. Links for book purchases will be sent to you in the Zoom chat box. Introducing Jacqueline and Chris this evening is our very own Carolyn Brody, owner of Bookhampton. Take it away, Carolyn.
Thank you, Dana, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. This is Bookhampton's last event of the summer, so we're really going out on a high note here, and I'm delighted to have this sort of crowning achievement. We started this year with Madeleine Albright, and so now we're ending again in the world, and I couldn't be more pleased. It's a personal pleasure for me, actually, to welcome Jacqueline Novogratz and Chris Anderson. I first met Jacqueline in 1995 when she started a program at the Rockefeller Foundation called the Philanthropy Workshop, and she was my teacher. And she doesn't really know this, but over the past 25 years, I've sort of followed her life a bit, and certainly her career. And she was, for me at that time, an incredibly inspirational and just remarkable teacher, really, in my life. I have to say that. I've never said this to her. I've never forgotten those days, and I sort of watch with pride at everything she's done. And as many of you know, she went on a few years after that to found and is the CEO of Acumen. And Acumen's a nonprofit global venture fund that uses entrepreneurial approaches to really address global poverty. And she works all over the world. And as I say, it's a personal pleasure because her work and her life has been really widely acclaimed, and she's so respected, and it's just a delight. This is her second book. Her first book was The Blue Sweater, which is sort of a memoir and starts out with a remarkable story about her traveling in Africa. But she's back with another book that it couldn't be more timely. And I'm really glad at this moment that she's here with us. And she's joined, this is really a twofer. So she's joined by Chris Anderson, also her husband, who, you know, for us, we're a little intimidated. So he's the head of TED Talks. And you know, he knows everything about how to do this, and also dedicated to game-changing ideas and really throughout the world. He's got a book that we've had also in the bookstore, and I urge you to come in and buy it. It's called TED Talks, the official TED Guide to Public Speaking. So it ought to be actually required reading for all of us. But again, I welcome to both of you, and I really look forward to an inspiring and provocative and, as I say, of the moment conversation.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you for explaining about the husband-wife thing, because we're not really practicing very good social distancing here. So that was a helpful clarification. Welcome to our kitchen, everyone. Thank you for taking this time. It's a shame about COVID. Otherwise, we could give you all a nice cup of tea and hang out. But we'll Zoom it together. One important piece of context, I think, before I start in with some questions. My relationship with Jacqueline was professional before it was personal. She was actually a speaker at the first TED conference I organized in 2003. You know, I've always been really fascinated by the question, what is the most effective way to make change in the world? How do you do it? It's a really challenging question. She had an answer that I hadn't really heard before, which was that you do it by investing in entrepreneurs the right way. Business done the right way can be incredibly powerful. And as an entrepreneur myself, I thought, well, that is a great idea. So I was impressed. A few years later, long story, we got married. We've been married the last 12 years, which means that I've had a ringside seat at a genuine change maker. And I've kind of seen some of what it takes. It's an incredibly challenging journey in so many ways, the attempts to raise money, the setbacks, but the moments of absolute joy and inspiration. And I think it's incredible that you've written this book as a way to distill some of that wisdom you've learned and brought to the world. Here is the book. It's called Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, Practices to Build a Better World. I mean, that's a big title, Jacqueline. Like, what do you mean by that title? What is this moral revolution? What do you mean by moral festival?
Thank you, Chris. It's quite something to be interviewed by your husband who started off with a professional relationship. But I also just want to start by saying thank you to Carolyn, Brody, and the team at Bookhampton. It's truly a thrill. I saw my first physical book in Bookhampton, and it was wonderful. And Margot Alexander, my partner in crime, who worked so hard for tonight. So before your big question, I just wanted to say thank you, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. What I mean by moral, I don't mean righteousness. I don't mean a set of rules prescribed from above and handed down. I mean a willingness in this completely complicated, interdependent world to navigate different belief systems, but in a moral grounding that sees as immutable our shared dignity that comes from our inherent interdependence, our interconnectedness. So moral, like so many of the other words that sound poetic in this book, is actually a muscular word, not a soft word.
And what about revolution?
So when I wrote the book, it was before a new generation had gotten in the streets demanding revolution. And so I've really been thinking a lot about the many definitions of what revolution actually means. And in so many ways, this next generation is holding to account our generation in saying that our systems are broken. They have run their course. And what we need now is a whole new set of systems. So the revolution that this book goes into really builds on that revolution in the streets by saying this revolution is for the builders. It's for how we reimagine and rebuild institutions that move from a world that has put profit at the center of its systems to one that puts our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth. And that is not easy. That's a revolution that comes neither from above nor from below, but from inside all of us.
Right, so it's not enough. So many people who talk about how to make the world better, they have some fix for democracy or some idea.
A silver bullet.
Yeah, they have a silver bullet of some kind. You're saying that's actually not enough unless we go to questions of character of the change makers and of all of us. We're not going to get that.
No, I mean, I've been doing this work. Carolyn talked about 25 years, 35 years, and the last 20 with Acumen. And ultimately, when I sat down to write the book, I could have talked about the technical aspects of what it means to create a company that serves the poor. But what separates those entrepreneurs that are building companies from those entrepreneurs that are solving some of the most intractable issues of our time is character. It's a character that's based in not only vision, but a grittiness and a determination to fail and start again and fight a status quo that doesn't want to change, and show up again and again and again. That's a rare quality. And to do that with integrity at this moment of history is is something that we all need to bring inside ourselves as well.
I mean, you described the book as, in some senses, a love letter to the next generation. Talk about that. Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, it came from a story that's, if I just told it in a quick way, when, I'd started my career in banking, then I went to Rwanda as a 25-year-old to start the nation's first microfinance bank. And there was a woman named Felicula who I really loved, who probably was the first person in the country to accept me across all lines of difference. When we started that bank, women had just gotten the right to open a bank account without their husband's signature. A few months after we started the bank, Felicula was killed in a hit-and-run accident. She was one of the first 3 women parliamentarians in the country, and she had put forward a policy to abolish bride price, and many in the nation blamed her for it. And so when she was killed in a mysterious hit-and-run accident, many associated it with this policy she had put forward. And it was the first time in a deeply visceral way I understood the price some courageous people pay for rejecting the status quo. So fast forward 30 years, almost to the week, and I'm back in the same place in Rwanda, presenting this time this big plan to electrify 10 million people's homes with solar power. And I'm about to speak to the president and his ministers, thinking about how the country had changed, how I had changed, when a young woman walked up to me and she said, "Miss Novogratz, I think you knew my auntie." I said, "Really? What was her name?" And she said, "Felicula." And I about burst into tears. And I realized at that moment that I was back in the same place for a reason. And I said, "I'm sorry, who are you? What is your name?" And she said, "My name is Monique, and I'm the Deputy General of the nation's national bank." And that was when, Chris, I thought, I am here in the same place to complete work that Felicula had started but couldn't complete in her lifetime. And frankly, it's to me to recommit to dreams so big I might not complete them in mine.
And you'd, I mean, 30 years earlier, you were trying to set up like the first microfinance bank. The customers you were seeking were women, and the notion that in 30 years time, you could have a woman helping run.
At the top of the financial sector, and Rwanda has more women parliamentarians has more women parliamentarians than any country on the planet. That change is possible. And then in this time of COVID that is so dark, where so many people think, how do we ever build back, let alone build back better? My life experience has shown me that a genocide which devastated a nation actually also allowed rebirth, and things are better.
So despite the genocide, despite everything, some of the dreams that you would have had 30 years ago actually happened.
Were bigger than I thought.
Bigger than you thought, yeah. So the book, so part of the target audience of the book is what? A young person who wants more for their life than just to make money or have a comfortable life. They really want to make the world a better place in some way. And what they may not yet know is that that's going to be a difficult journey. And you're trying to give some markers, some guidance for that.
Yeah, although I thought it was for young people. What's been really interesting is how many CEOs, lawyers, teachers, social workers have written me, particularly around this idea of just start as a way of deciding that you're going to make change, and just start to make the change even if you don't have a game plan, because if you have the commitment and the courage to start the work will teach you. So it's actually been quite surprising, Chris, to see that, yes, young people, they're kind of my people, but also this is a moment for us all to be young again, for us all to renew our own sense of curiosity about how we reimagine and rebuild.
So each chapter of the book is a different principle that can be applied if you want to go on this journey of trying to make change. And you begin with, just start. I think very soon you come to this notion of moral imagination, to cultivate moral imagination. What do you mean by moral imagination?
Well, so many of us use only the lens of our own imagination. And that doesn't work when we're designing systems for people whose lives are completely unlike our own. Moral imagination demands putting ourselves in another person's shoes and building from their perspective. So it starts with empathy, but empathy alone isn't enough. What empathy alone does is reinforce the status quo. You have to move beyond that. And so the way you move beyond that is to immerse in the lives of those individuals for whom systems need to change. You need to understand the systems that get in their way and what holds them back. And again, it's very muscular. That's the beginning of action that actually is based in people's needs, not what you think they need.
I mean, is it fair to say that in most change that matters doesn't come easily? There's a complexity to it. You won't get there just by meeting someone, feeling sorry for them, and then figuring out what to do. It's by actually spending time with them. You need to develop your imagination enough to really get a sense of the just how much has to change, the systemic change perhaps that has to happen if you're to make a genuine difference in that life and in the lives of people like them.
Well, look, we're going through this in our own country right now. We see people on the one hand victimizing, on the other hand sometimes idealizing. That what you have to do is see other people as full human beings that are part of us. It's hard. I've made so many mistakes in my own life, whether I've had not enough empathy or too much empathy in terms of, starting a bakery with 20 women, single moms who the city called prostitutes, a very conservative town. And when we first started this bakery, the women stole blindly from me because I didn't have strong enough systems of accountability. And if I were really honest with myself, it's because I felt both sorry for them and thought that we were all on the same team. And it was like, whoa, we're not going to, I am not doing anybody any favors unless we run this like a business, hold people to accountability. And in many ways, that was the beginning of understanding that generosity doesn't work if it is not bolstered by accountability. And so that's the kind of tension. We can feel good with generosity, but if we want to build, we need to go for the more complex.
So this process of developing moral imagination will look different in many cases, I guess, depending on what someone's cause is, how they want to get proximate with the issue. I mean, in your case, you spent just countless hours on countless trips in slums, in villages, just like sitting on the floor in people's little homes, listening to them. And I've seen you in that circumstance and seen how alive you are in that circumstance. But what did you learn from that? Did it actually shape some of the actions that you subsequently did to try to make change?
Yeah, every time. I think it's another one of the principles in the book is listening. And can we learn to listen from a place of inquiry rather than certainty? Again, it sounds beautiful. It's hard to do. And for me, as you know, there's no place I'd rather be than sitting in a slum or on the ground in a rural village, really listening to another person's human experience and realizing the shortcomings of my own imagination in terms of our companies, how we make change. And when it works, when you're really listening, people will tell you the truth. And so, we have a solar company that's now reached 100 million people. Every step of the way, they use their moral imagination because they cared so much about some of the lowest income people in the world as customers, not as passive recipients of charity, understanding that meant they had to price whatever they were selling in a way and finance it so that people could actually afford it, access it, and value it. And I'll never forget sitting with this woman named Teresia. It was this tiny little grandmother, and she had bought this $30 lantern, and we were there in the middle of the day, but her house had only one little window, so it could have been midnight. And she was explaining to me and this big regional director what she liked about the lights. And, you know, I'd gone to so many of these huts when it was all about charity, and we were kind of playing a game where people would be like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the donors would feel good and everybody would leave and you weren't having an honest conversation. So I said, Teresia, tell Mr. Small what you like about the light. And she gave all these good reasons that she liked the light. And then I said, tell him how he could improve the light. And she kind of looked at him and said, well, first, it would really help me if I could hang the light by a string and not have to have it on my table. Second, if I could have different light qualities, that would help me too. And third, I'd really like to be able to charge my cell phone at the same time that I can charge my light. Super sophisticated, illiterate, tiny grandmother. And as I was watching her, I was thinking, this is why I do this work. Because she isn't pandering. She isn't telling him a story. She's talking to him as someone who has deserved and earned his trust, and he is trying to earn it. And in that interaction is dignity of her and him. And so it changes everything. And D-Light changed their product based on people like Teresia.
So it's interesting. So building these companies, like the usual argument given as to why that's a powerful way of making change is that that's the only way that you're going to get to scale. You know, by having a profitable company, they can keep reinvesting into growth. And so that's how you reach, you know, millions of people. But in this particular story, there's almost something else, is that the relationship between recipient and provider is shifted from one of dependency, thank you, thank you, thank you, to dignity, to, you know, hey,
For both of them.
For both of them. Yeah. That's cool.
Well, and I think this is what this moment where we've seen COVID lay bare these gaping wounds in all of our systems, and Black Lives Matter saying, we are not a society that is taking care of each other. This is where the shift needs to happen, that we are in relationship with one another, even and maybe especially in this global community.
So when people think of you know, moral revolution, they sometimes in their mind is, oh, this is like a crusade. You know, there's a right answer. You know, we're just going in to advance that one cause. You talk a lot in this book about how it's actually making changes more complicated than that. And you have a whole chapter devoted to holding in tension different values. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And again, you know, it's hard to have any of these conversations without awareness of this political moment, this multiple crisis that we are in, health, economic, leadership. And we are not listening to each other. We are not talking to each other. And so when I was younger and more as an activist, I could tell you what was wrong. And I see myself in so many of the people right now. And we need those voices saying, this is what is not working, to actually then go and build in ways that make things work as a change maker requires sometimes partnering with people, not only that you don't like, but where you don't share all the same values. And so you've got to find a way to navigate to a common minimum of shared values. And it's every aspect of the work that you do. So when I started Acumen, many felt that it was a really bad idea because you make money one way, you maximize shareholder returns, and then you give your money away as philanthropy. And so I had to find a way to navigate, to recognize the power of markets, the power of capitalism, and only then talk about the perils and the limits of markets and capitalism and why we needed at least to experiment with a different kind of model, one that would take philanthropy, make these long-term investments. And so when we now teach to our fellows, what does it mean to hold values in tension? And I've already talked about generosity and accountability. It's also how do you partner with people and enable beliefs to be held in tension while you build a sense of wholeness that can encompass our diversity of values and beliefs. And in that way, it's, can you recognize a truth or a half-truth, or even a minuscule truth in what the other side says, if only to show that you're listening, that there is respect, so that you can open a field. The poet Sufi said, the poet Rumi, the Sufi poet, says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And that's, again, to build, and to build in multiple nations across race, class, ethnicity. You have to have that skill of holding the tension and recognizing that the perfect doesn't exist, but that progress lives in the imperfect.
I mean, it's a challenging idea, especially at this moment, where so many people feel, you know, this is you know, once in a generation chance to stand up to defeat historic, you know, systemic evil. You know, there's right and wrong here, and people push back on the notion. And I think, I don't think this is what you're arguing, but people push back on the notion, any notion that says, well, there's people on this side and there's people on that side, or, you know, there's this case and there's the other case, let's find a compromise in the middle. That's really not what you're saying. You're not arguing against the force of a moral cause. What you're talking about is what it takes to actually take the next step.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is what it takes to take a moral cause and make it a moral reality. There, I'm by no means saying, well, there's right, you know, there's right and wrong on all sides. There are immutable truths that we have to hold dear, and human dignity is at the center of those immutable truths. You go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is something we have to hold and to cherish. And right now we are in a fight about what that means and how we define that. To actually then build the solutions to bring health to all of us. It's too easy to say, well, it's socialism, it's capitalism. What does that mean? We have to get under to the values. Even if we brought healthcare, health insurance to every human being, which I actually believe we must do, it's not going to solve America's health problem. It'll be part of it. It'll be an important part. But then we also have to look at our food systems, our economic systems, our criminal justice systems. And so it's that nuance, Chris, to get as many people into the tent so that we can build in real ways. The reason to acknowledge the person who's on the other side of the debate with you, which in our case sometimes is a government official that doesn't want you to work there. It's people who don't believe in solar because they are part of a kerosene mafia, and so they don't want you there. They're actually fighting to have you there. To come in just as an enemy negates the creative and generative opportunity of pulling them in to be your ally, which I believe if you're standing on good, you ultimately can do.
So it's it's a pretty hard ask you're making of people, really. Like, people want to buy a book that is 7 quick tips to make you a global superhero or whatever, and you know, you're not really offering that. It's like, what you're saying is actually it's going to be damn hard. You've got to give a lot of yourself. And there aren't easy answers. You actually got to be ready to open yourself up to these uncomfortable feelings of, oh my God, how do I relate to this person or this thing that I don't feel that comfortable with? How any comforting words for anyone?
Okay, you are my husband. You're asking me these hard questions. The deal is that change is hard. And it is only when we embrace the difficult that we really create the kind of structural change that is needed in the world. Secondly, there is no more meaningful life. And we all know this. We think about every relationship that we have, everything that we've done that we're proudest of has usually been hard, not easy. And so I actually think that one of the big mistakes our generation made is we saw the serious people as the people who went and made a lot of money, and we looked at them as successful based on money, fame, power. And then we saw the people that were trying to change the world as do-gooders. And that was a false bifurcation. This generation has the chance to work on the toughest problems in the world and make it their lifelong journey. And it won't be easy, but it will be fulfilling. It will be rich and meaningful. And the secret that nobody ever tells you, because there are lots of nights where you cry and feel like a loser and have self-doubt, is that at every step of the journey, there's also beauty to be found.
Beauty.
Beauty.
So talk about that. Like that's such a unexpected thing to say in a way. Like what beauty? What are you talking about?
Well, again, I can take it to this moment, Chris, of so much hardship, so much loss, so much suffering. And yet I bet if I asked any random person that's listening tonight to think about some of the good things that have happened, we can all think of those things for which we're grateful. It's the same with the work that we get to do. It may be the beauty of having this deep human connection, and when you are sitting on the floor, for me, it may be the recognition that in the cruelest, meanest places, we often find women putting bright red geraniums in coffee cans, or people writing beautiful music. There is something in the human spirit that understands that the presence of beauty signifies the urge to life, the urge to remind ourselves that we are here, that we are more than our means, more than our economic condition, more than our health, more than any other kind of quality. And so for me, we can all define beauty differently, but it sits on decidedly spiritual ground, and it is the sustenance that keeps us going when it feels like we're not going to succeed. At least that's how I feel.
I mean, I'm thinking of a parent whose kid is about to start a life, and you know, a lot of parents.
And many of them have called me and said, "You've ruined my child's life." As you know.
A lot of parents, the first thing they'll say, what do you want for your child? Say, I just want them to be happy.
Or safe.
Or safe. You know, so are you telling me that you don't want them to fly away and go to a dangerous city and work 18 hours a day, getting dirty and possibly sick and whatever, to try and make the world better and, you know, not see you that often, etc.? Yeah, I'm telling you that. And yet, the paradox of you, apart from the fact that you've got remarkable parents who embraced your life choices, is that on the one hand, you know, you have the hardest work of anyone I've ever seen. You wake up crazy early, if I may say so, every day. Get like 5 hours sleep. You work these 14-hour days. You put yourself through extraordinary stress, and yet you're one of the most sort of like deeply, joyfully, celebratorily happy people I've ever met. I mean, is this just a freak coincidence, or is some of that joy actually like it's connected to the belief in what you're doing and actually seeing that it's working?
It's also connected to, I think, doing the work that I love with people that I love for a purpose I deeply believe in. And by clarifying values early on and taking on this stuff that we probably won't complete in our lifetime, I get to work with people who make me feel so proud to be part of a community. And I don't just mean the people on my team, although they are extraordinary and I learn from them all the time, but every partner, every entrepreneur, all of our fellows, the community that we have been able to build is a community that cares about making the world better every day. And And because it's so diverse, and because it's challenged us to learn how to build a sense of wholeness that encompasses and belonging, I feel like it keeps making us better. And this is it, Chris. I don't have to tell you this. You work just as hard. There's a sense of, I think there's a recognition, especially as we grow older, that our life is not that long. Our time is short. All we have is each other. And I don't want in 100 years, a generation to look back at us and say we were blind, say we were too satisfied. And right now, I don't see how anybody can be satisfied. I want them to say, look how hard they tried.
Oh, it's holding up a heart. That's nice. Okay, you guys are going to, your questions are coming in just a minute. So I think you're meant to put those into the chat, type them in, and they'll be coming in a minute. Just before that, I mean, your book is its own manifesto. You believe in the power of manifesto. You co-authored with others the manifesto for your own organization, Acumen. And it's inspired a lot of people to create their own, and perhaps it gives a sense of what you hope that the book will bring people. Obviously, other people working on different causes will have things that are slightly different. They'll have their own. But I'd love you to read that manifesto, because I personally find it inspiring, and I think it's a good way to wrap up some of your thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
The rain is deluging here. If you can hear anything in the background, that is rain.
All right. It starts by standing with the poor, listening to voices unheard and recognizing potential where others see despair. It demands investing as a means, not an end, daring to go where markets have failed and aid has fallen short. It makes capital work for us, not control us. It thrives on moral imagination, the humility to see the world as it is and the audacity to imagine it as it could be. It's having the ambition to learn at the edge, the wisdom to admit failure, and the courage to start again. It requires patience and kindness, resilience and grit, a hard-edged hope. It's leadership that rejects complacency, breaks through bureaucracy, and challenges corruption, doing what's right, not what's easy. It's the radical idea of creating hope in a cynical world, changing the way the world tackles poverty, and building one based on dignity.
A hard-edged hope, that symbolizes so much of what I think about you. It's like believe that there is a way forward. At one level, it's profoundly optimistic, but it is not naive optimism. It's saying this is going to take a lot to get there. But if you let go of the hope piece, there is no hope.
In a way, Chris, it also goes back to tensions, that I feel that we're at a moment in the world where we think that there are good people and bad people. And, you know, I've experienced a country that went through genocide. I've worked in some of the hardest, most corrupt sectors on the planet. And one of my biggest takeaways is that we cannot categorize people as good people and bad people. We all have elements of the good and the bad inside. And it's the role of leadership. And right now we all need to be those leaders to bring out the good and find that in each other. And that's a big challenge. But that, I think, is also part of the manifesto.
Thank you. All right. Your questions.
Questions are rolling in here. Thank you to our audience. First question, Jacqueline, what change do you hope people will have after reading your book?
Well, in a way, I feel like we've talked a little bit about that, but that this sense that we no longer can look at change as somebody else's domain. This is a moment in history where it's the domain of all of us. We have corporations out there that are saying it's time to move to stakeholder capitalism away from shareholder capitalism. The reason they are making that shift is in part because of some enlightened CEOs who see the necessity of it. Largely, it's consumers and it's employees. And I think that a new generation is starting to recognize their own voice and their own power, but we all have it.
All right. The majority of governments, especially in Africa, lacks accountability. How does this affect your work in such locations? And have you had the opportunity to speak truth to power? How do you do this?
So I'm smiling because I'm thinking, I'm not so sure I can think of that many governments right now that don't lack accountability, but that's a whole other conversation. So yes, so let's just make it more broad. We work in many places in the world where governments lack accountability, and it probably won't surprise you, but I do speak truth to power, particularly when we have earned that right, so that we're in the room and we're both insider outsiders. And I think that there's great power in being an outsider, and there's great power in being an insider. Acumen has managed to become insiders and outsiders. And so the way, again, to speak truth is, for at least the way that we do it as builders, is to show where we see the truth that's needed, but then back it up by a willingness to do the work to bring that truth to fruition. It takes a long time and it's super uncomfortable, but it's possible.
Why is it difficult to hold human dignity at the center of immutable truth?
Because human beings are afraid. There's so much that we fear, and the world takes our courage from us. And so we tend to find people who look like us, want to be like us. And in times of real insecurity, when we feel more fear, it's easier to blame other people for things that frighten us than to recognize it's part of all of us. And that is where we see human dignity most at risk. And what's frightening for this moment of insecurity, which is why that moral leadership is so important, is that in times of insecurity, it gets really easy for demagogues to prey on those insecurities and those fears and make us do terrible things by seeing other people as less than ourselves. And that is nothing if not a deep violation of our shared human dignity.
This is for Jacqueline and for Chris. Who is your hero, personally and globally?
Why don't you take that first?
Other than Jacqueline, you may have detected that I do think of her as a hero. I don't have there's not like one person, but I do think that entrepreneurs change the world ultimately more than politicians. I think my heroes are the people who can picture the future and can have some bold, crazy bold vision for how to make it a better place, and can put the pieces together to do that. So for all his faults, and there are many, someone like Elon Musk, it will go down in history as someone who has dramatically changed the world because of being able to picture the future of a technology and a business and an economic system and the things that it will take to make those systems real and put them together and follow them with such conviction that the world changes. So entrepreneur, I'm going to say that my heroes are entrepreneurs, even though many of them have deep flaws, and it's why bringing character to entrepreneurs is such an important thing to do.
Well, and just in the spirit of holding tensions, I think I'm at a point, having seen us elevate individual entrepreneurs to the status of kings, as we have done too many individuals, that this may be a moment in history where we don't need another hero, but we need millions of heroic acts. What I'm getting more obsessed with is role models. Who are the role models that are defining their own success based on the amount of human energy they release? And it's interesting that I am actually going to think of politicians, Chris, even though I believe in entrepreneurship in a deep way. But when I look at Jacinda Ardern and Angela Merkel right now, and the way they are so clearly putting service to others in front of themselves, and they're listening, they are so manifesting. Greta, Malala. It's kind of strange that they're all women, but maybe you can think of a man in this period. But that there is a growing group of role models that are speaking on behalf of the vulnerable in ways that are not paternalistic, but are in ways that are full of urgency and power.
All right. How do you collaborate, Jacqueline, with different people who mean to help but have different ideas of what is right? In addition to that, especially with international aid organizations such as World Bank and or IMF in your work?
Well, so we collaborate. We're equal opportunity collaborator. We collaborate with USAID on post-conflict work in Colombia, and the IFC, and with big corporations like Unilever, and with peace activists amongst our fellows. So we really have had to learn to hold the tensions. And I think it's taught us that the key to partnership is to approach it with humility and audacity. And audacity in that we really believe that we can get this done. Humility in that when we approach partnerships now, we start from a place of vulnerability and talk about what we're good at, but also what we're not so good at. We're really clear about why we are in a particular relationship, what our values are, and we spend a lot more time now than we used to ensure that the other side, again, has that common minimum, that they are after the same North Star and there's a common minimum of values. And then we do our best to have an honest relationship. So I would say that our best relationships, whether it's with an IKEA foundation or a USAID in Colombia, are those relationships where we can honestly talk about what's working and what's not working. And that's where the rubber hits the road.
Your synthesis of what you have learned over the last 30 years demonstrates incredible moral maturity. What do you think will help us develop as a more mature society?
I don't even know what to do with that question. I actually think, ironically, I think we have to have more of a childlike curiosity, that we have to move away from being so certain and be willing to be seekers. That moral maturity recognizes that, and I'm speaking right now as an American, that America is an extraordinary country. And it's a moment of recognizing our interdependence with the rest of the world, that holding on to exceptionalism has blinded us to where we need to get strong. And where we need to get strong is in protecting the weak. And so while we might start with this idea of maturity, I would say it starts by holding on to some of the childlike sense of wonder and becoming more of seekers, looking for the solutions without ideology and trite assumption, but rather a deep commitment to things bigger than ourselves, and a new definition of success that celebrates those that do just that.
Did you ever at one time want to abandon your mission for a more relaxing, less stressful, less painful life? What was your turning point?
Last Tuesday, right?
It could have been Tuesday. Yes, there have definitely been times. I think the hardest time for me was my 30s, my early 30s. when there's so many, you're at so many crossroads, and friends are either getting wealthy or getting married and having fabulous homes and families or fabulous careers. And I was doing something nobody understood without making any money and didn't have a husband or a house or children. And there were many nights where I thought, what am I doing? And it hurt. And that's, again, where I think this beauty and this sense of just following the thread and trusting in it really helps you move forward. And I think in these days, there are probably moments when all of us have said, am I right for this moment? And maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does this moment need from me? And it may not be what a year ago needed from me. And I think it's allowing ourselves that space, that liminal space, if you will, as well, to recognize that it's only human to have dips. And that's where we need friends, cohorts, and to be reminded again of the commitment that we made that will keep us focused on where we broadly need to go, and trust that the next step will open up a path for the step after that. How would you answer that?
I mean, I like change, so I don't like to do like the same thing for 7 years, 10 years or whatever. So with TED and with other things in my life, I've always tried to find a new way of, okay, we've been doing these talks online, what else can we do that would be interesting? So that's, so.
But there have been moments when you have felt really low.
Oh, definitely. But my
your go-to is
solution
just
to
start
it is often,
something new.
Can we?
Well, that's what we
invent something else, and so that's been fun. So we keep having new ideas, and some of them are bad, and some of them are okay.
As someone who leads culture change in a large corporation, I'm seeing a shift in what is valued insofar as ethical, virtuous leadership as part of our next generation of leaders. I especially appreciated the guidance to just start, but wondered if you had a recommendation on how this can be leveraged as part of a leadership development in a corporate environment.
That's a great question. Because, I talk to a growing number of CEOs now who want to just have conversations about everything from how do they retrofit a purpose statement, which always makes me nervous. I see my friend Cynthia Scher there, who coaches CEOs, and I think, okay, we might be in trouble if we're retrofitting our purpose statements, but to CEOs who are struggling right now because they say that they've got a new generation that is complaining that they're not sustainable enough, that they're not inclusive enough, but they're not bringing forward real suggestions for how to make things better. And so what I've said to them is, can you offer opportunities so that people open the space so people have courage to make that happen? And it was a great moment early in the year or late in the fall when a number of Acumen team members came to me and said, we want to start a composting program at Acumen. We're right in the middle of Tribeca in New York City. And I was like, composting program? They're like, don't worry, we're figuring it all out. It's going to be amazing. And it's been amazing, or it was amazing, and it will be amazing again. And so it's on both sides. I think that culturally, corporations can, especially when they're hearing disgruntled employees, can come back to them and say, all right, take it, make a mistake. But when you have that recommendation, follow it up, and you be the ones to make those programs happen. And I think we need to do more of that.
More specifically, there is a thing called Acumen Academy that actually has a pretty amazing set of courses, including a master course that covers most of the principles that are in the book. And it seems like pretty much everyone who starts that course ends up finishing it, which doesn't usually happen online. So there must be something good to it.
Actually, we just got this great SAP sponsored 83 of their employees as part of this. Thank you, Chris, for that plug. SAP, the corporation, just sponsored 83 of their young employees, and it's an 11-week course. It's an intense course, 3 to 4 hours a week in groups, and it goes through all the principles, as Chris said. And the employees made a video to thank SAP for giving them this opportunity so that they can then go out into the world and do what they want to do. And it is incredible to watch this video.
Is that on YouTube?
It's on YouTube.
So if you Google SAP Acumen Academy, you might find it.
Maybe. We can get the link to Bookhampton for anyone who's interested. I just saw it yesterday.
All right. What would you suggest us do when systems are changing so dramatically with potential to be better, but status quo fights back, potentially bringing us back to normal or even worse?
We cannot go back to normal or even worse. What I would suggest that we all do is get stronger, get more resilient, and find those leaders and build that change. I don't think going back is an option. I know going back is not an option. And you do start to hear already voices of the status quo pulling back into business as usual. I'm particularly worried about a reduced focus on climate change as we are struggling with our economic situation, which is really a crisis situation. And that's not an option either, as we are dealing with hurricanes in Louisiana and fires in California to remind us. And so I think that it's about doubling down, not letting it being an option, raising our voices, and building the solutions, coming up with new ones.
It's part of the implication of your book there that not every battle is just us versus the status quo, that there might be a reframing there to say, are there parts of the status quo that are actually potentially on our side that we can work with and build from? Because if it's just us versus the status quo, that may be a battle, that can't always be won. And in fact, if it was won, maybe you throw out some babies with the bathwater.
Well, I still think it's about changing the status quo, Chris. However, it is working with institutions we sometimes associate with the status quo and helping them change. And so right now, an example that I'm so excited about is with Azahar Coffee, which has developed a sustainable buying guide to ensure that smallholder farmers who grow coffee are paid a price that not only gets them out of poverty, but actually allows them a living wage. It's amazing to see that. There are companies that are interested in it at the $100 million level. Now it's time to get to the big corporations and really see which corporations will then change. Even though it's painful because it comes with a cost in the short term. So I don't think it's an us, them against a recalcitrant, mean status quo, but leadership is about not just service, but getting people to do things that are uncomfortable. And that's really what I'm talking about.
And this is going to be our last question from the audience this evening, and it's for both of you. Is there something that you have seen happen that has sprung up and is positive and in line with your moral manifesto despite or because of the pandemic this year?
I mean, there are so many stories of people who've responded in different ways. Seen restaurants, apply their services to offering meals for those who need them. You've seen organizations like the Harlem Children's Zone apply years of experience of serving communities in multiple ways, stepping in and stepping up their efforts in this moment to do really extraordinary work. We've seen numerous like entrepreneurs in science and in healthcare figuring out how they can play their part, whether it's in vaccine development or testing or whatever. All of those things have been really inspiring to me, and it's almost beyond that, just the notion that this is a moment. I mean, look, a lot of us are in incredibly privileged positions. If you're someone who can do most of your regular work from home with an internet connection, you are unbelievably lucky. I certainly put myself in that category. But even those of us in that category have had to reinvent our organizations from the ground up in terms of how we actually operate and what we do. That spirit of reinvention I find thrilling and inspiring, and the fact that this terrible enemy has forced us to reinvent so many things. We're going to look back on this with huge gratitude. The fact that for years and years and years to come, we will be flying less. We will be spending less time in airport queues and more time with families and yes, on Zoom and so forth. But that is a permanent shift. We may well have changed office life forever and empower more flexible working time. There's many things like that I personally think are exciting. And finally, I'll say this: there is a scenario where this pandemic will actually aid this issue of climate change, rather than, I mean, for now it's distracted attention from it. It's also reduced emissions, but it's shown in the most vivid way that you have to take science seriously. I mean, you just have to. When science warns about a terrible thing coming, you have to pay attention. And if part of the outcome of this is to elevate the voices of scientists, that is awesome, because there's a much bigger thing that they are warning us about, and we had better act on it.
Well, and just to build and go more directly into the moral part of the question, in addition to the things that Chris is talking about, I think we've all rediscovered the importance and power of kindness in watching people reach out to their neighbors, know their families, do simple, smaller things. Importantly, I have seen an explosion of generosity as entrepreneurs have pivoted. And just to give a few examples, I mean, at Acumen, our model is to invest equity and debt. And suddenly we saw across the world, particularly in the developing world, we have 300 million people who've gotten our services. We have tens of thousands of jobs in these companies. Those jobs go away, and you're talking about people unable to feed their families at all. Zero income, zero safety net. And so to be able to go into a privileged community and say, can you give us grants so that we can pass them to all of these companies and these fellows to get them through, was just extraordinary to see this. Just yes, no questions, just yes. The second thing then was to watch entrepreneurs in all countries change their business models because they had that same North Star. And I know that they went through days when they could not have been darker because it looked like they were losing everything. One was a guy named Sam Polk who runs a company called Every Table in Los Angeles. We had helped them grow from 1 restaurant to 8 restaurants. This is a guy that saw the devastation of food deserts and the connection of food deserts to poor health in our urban centers. And so we started this restaurant as a fast food, nutritious, affordable restaurant in Compton, Los Angeles. Built it to 8 restaurants. The first day of lockdown, some entrepreneurs would have just closed down and furloughed their employees. This guy's like, wait a minute, my mission is to get healthy, affordable food to my community. And so he put on social media that You could still get the food, but they'd have to deliver it. If you could pay for it, great. If you couldn't, they would get it to you anyway. And if you were willing to pay it forward, he gave people a link. Within a couple of weeks, he had delivered 160,000 meals. By now, today, because they're now partnering with government, he's delivering 180,000 meals a day. Significantly increased the number of employees. Angelinos have become small-scale philanthropists to contribute to their community. Government, it's doing its part. The business model is different, and we are starting to see what I believe is the future, that the markets will see one element of the work that they do, but to do the work better, they will partner with government, with nonprofits, so that we stay focused on building a society where we are all included. To me, that is the most generative and hopeful type of moral imagination in crisis that I hope brings us to the next. And I know we don't have time, but I have examples from Pakistan to India to Colombia that just really show the ingenuity and the imagination of people when driven with the right character, supported with the right capital, but also surrounded by the right community. And that's something we all have to spend more time thinking about. How do we build those communities and think not just about our rights in them, but our responsibilities to each other.
All right, really quickly before we wrap, Jacqueline and Chris, if you had to describe Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, 10 seconds, how would you describe it?
He's probably better at it than I am.
A dangerous book that could transform your life and those of others.
Well, what he said. It's a set of questions to lead you on your own path to wisdom, and a set of principles to help you do what you need to do to build a better world.
I love it. Jacqueline and Chris, thank you both so very much for being with us this evening, for sharing with us. It has been such a great pleasure and honor hosting you. And to our wonderful guests for tuning in tonight, joining in on this conversation, and supporting your local independent bookstores. We could not do this without you. Manifesto for a Moral Revolution by Jacqueline Novogratz can be purchased online, over the phone, or in store at Bookhampton and RJ Julia. Happy reading all, and have a great night. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many beautiful faces and friends that we know, and new people who we don't know. So thank you. And thank you, Carolyn, and the whole team at Bookhampton, and Margot and Sonia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Wonderfully done.